In Praise of Lewis and Clark and the President Who Sent Them by Dr. J. Rufus Fierce. We conservatives need role models and historical heroes, and we are denying ourselves of one of these if we fail to recognize Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson embodies many conservative characteristics. For example, he was a true limited government man. Quote, "That government is best that governs least," unquote, is attributed to Jefferson. Then too, he was for the free market economy and also for a very tight construction of the Constitution. Contrast him with Alexander Hamilton, who is often admired by conservatives. Hamilton's constructions of the Constitution were very loose. He's the original big government man and had to be held in check at the Constitutional Convention to avoid a monarchy. He also wanted to abolish the states in order to increase the power of the federal government, and was a major proponent of tariffs and trade barriers. Above all, Thomas Jefferson was responsible for one of our government's best decisions, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Acquiring that vast empire for $15 million was a shrewd business deal, and it was due entirely to Jefferson and his ability as president to act decisively in a critical moment. He did not look to public opinion polls, but he would not act until he was assured that under the Constitution he had the power to make treaties. This was essentially a treaty with Napoleon. With one fell swoop, he removed the danger of an imperialistic France on our frontiers and brought us an empire bigger than any in Europe. Jefferson made this significant move for several reasons. First, to give us security. Secondly, to be sure there would be plenty of land for independent farmers. He wanted the country to be full of independent farmers. You cannot have a more conservative vision than that. And thirdly, to open up a free trade empire at the center of the country with all those natural resources. Of course, they were primarily thinking about fur, but they were also thinking about minerals. So, to make sure this all happened, Jefferson sent out Captain Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, along with 33 members for their Corps of Discovery. Now that's a pretty cost-efficient operation. Can you picture something like that being undertaken today? Why, the number of reporters that would go along would be twice that. Moreover, on the whole trip, Lewis and Clark only lost one man, Sergeant Floyd, who died of appendicitis. They explored this whole territory, covering more than 8,000 miles in just 3 years. They kept copious journals locating flora, fauna, and also mineral deposits, so this land could later be worked. Another of their tasks was to establish diplomatic ties with Native Americans. They went to the territory of some of the most warlike tribes, like the Blackfeet. And in the whole of their journey, only one Native American, a Sioux, was killed, and that was because he was stealing from them. That's a pretty amazing record. Lewis and Clark were given a standing sum of $2,500 to buy supplies. The final total cost came in at $2,600, which is not bad considering the task at hand and the fact that they had very little way of judging how long it would take. It is true that later on it was about $60,000, but that included the gifts of land for the men who had gone along and the presents to the Native American chiefs. That is still a paltry sum to pay for an empire. The original expedition came in almost exactly at cost. Government today ought likewise to operate on that very limited basis with close accounting and concrete results. I'd contrast that with an agency like NASA and all the money it spends with very little to show for it over the last several years. Or look at the U.S. Department of the Interior, a massive, expensive bureaucracy. We should also note Jefferson's embodiment of one of OCPA's core values, individual initiative. Jefferson does not set up some committee to study the feasibility. He takes his private secretary, that's what Lewis was, and asks if he would like to go out west. And Lewis and Clark were the perfect men to do it. They formed the most lasting friendship, were very complimentary towards each other, and trusted each other completely. Clark even named his son Meriwether Lewis Clark. Last summer was the culmination of the bicentennial anniversary of the Lewis and Clark expedition, and an unfortunate piece about the event ran in the Wall Street Journal. Lewis and Clark are met with a yawn after 200 years. Bicentennial festivities failed to attract big crowds. Judging by this article, I believe that the author, Brooks Barnes, has never been west of the George Washington Bridge. His main agenda was to poke fun at the Middle America and its good values. He quotes Stephen Dow Beckham, a professor at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, who contends that Lewis and Clark, quote, were smart but flawed guys who could have gotten lost on the way to the outhouse, unquote. Here again is the negative attitude. Then, of course, he also brought up that Native Americans have mixed feelings about celebrating the bicentennial anniversary of the expedition. However, the Lewis and Clark expedition was one of the most satisfactory and least confrontational encounters between the United States government and Native Americans. After all, it is one of the main constitutional duties of the government to establish treaties, and that is what Lewis and Clark did so very well. The fact is, Native Americans do not seem to know much about Lewis and Clark because they were treated very well, and Lewis and Clark did not bring any diseases. It always amazes me that academics, whose main task is to drive their office a few days a month, criticize Lewis and Clark for making their way 8,000 miles. Instead of nitpicking the effort, we ought to use this anniversary to pause and marvel at the accomplishment of these two outstanding individuals. We further ought to contrast 200 years ago with today, when huge departments are not only defective, but also audited and found to have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. With the legacy of the Louisiana Purchase, something government did well, lies the key to understanding why Jefferson is a great role model for conservatives today.